Hello, sleepers. Before we begin tonight's journey, I need you to understand something crucial. Everything you're about to hear happened because of a single choice made by someone who wasn't even supposed to exist. The fates themselves never saw it coming. Chaos, the primordial void, didn't predict it. Even time itself, Chronos, the Titan who can see across past, present, and future, never anticipated that his own grandson would spare his life. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how mercy defeated time, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to the moment when silence fell over the house of Hades, and an infant's cry was cut short by the return of something that should have stayed buried forever. Settle in. Let your breathing slow. Tonight, we unravel the master plan of a being who weaponized eternity itself and the unexpected twist that brought him to his knees. This is the complete story of Chronos, the Titan of Time. Part 1. The night time stopped. The House of Hades had known peace for years. After everything Zagreus went through, all those deaths, all those escapes, all that family drama finally resolved, Hades' domain had settled into comfortable routine. The Lord of the Underworld managed his realm with stern efficiency. Persephone brought warmth to cold stone halls. And their newest addition, baby Melinoë, represented hope for a future free from ancient conflicts. But here's the thing about comfort. It makes you forget that danger never truly sleeps. It just waits. The attack, when it came, was surgical. No warning, no declaration of war. Just sudden, absolute domination. Chronos appeared in the grand hall, and reality bent around him. He towered over even the gods, a figure of dark grey skin marked with golden scars that gleamed like rivers of molten metal. Each scar traced where his body had been cut apart millennia ago, then impossibly reassembled. White eyes blazed with cold light. White hair swept back from a face that wore aristocratic menace like a mask. Upon his head sat a small golden halo. In his hands, the curved golden scythe that had once dismembered him, now reclaimed as the ultimate irony. The Titan of Time had returned, and he hadn't come to negotiate. Nyx fell first. The primordial personification of night herself, one of the oldest, most powerful forces in existence, was neutralized in an instant. Chronos raised one hand. Reality around Nyx simply stopped. Not frozen like ice. Not paused like a video. Time itself ceased to flow for her. She became trapped in a single eternal moment, conscious and aware but utterly unable to move, to speak, to do anything except exist in that terrible instant forever. Her eyes remained open, watching, helpless. One by one, the others fell to the same fate. Thanatos, Death himself, caught mid-reach for his scythe. Dusa the Gorgon, suspended mid-flight. Megaera frozen with her whip raised. Achilles, the greatest warrior Greece ever, produced, stopped with hand outstretched toward a weapon he'd never reach. Even Zagreus, who'd died and returned hundreds of times, found himself trapped in temporal stasis, his mismatched eyes wide with shock. This wasn't violence in any conventional sense. This was something far more terrible. The power to simply remove someone from existence's flow, to trap them in time rather than space, to make them living statues, forever aware of their imprisonment but powerless to escape it. Persephone clutched infant Melinoë as Chronos approached. The queen of the underworld had faced gods, monsters, and the darkness of Tartarus itself. But this was different. This was facing the embodiment of inevitability. Hades stepped between them, father and son facing each other across the wreckage of family. Their exchange was brief. Chronos demanded the location of the three fates, those weavers of destiny who controlled the threads of every life. Hades genuinely didn't know. The fates kept their own counsel, dwelling in spaces beyond even divine knowledge. Chronos didn't believe him, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Revenge isn't about truth. It's about inflicting suffering equal to what was suffered. But here's where Chronos made an interesting choice. He didn't freeze Hades like the others. No, that would be too merciful, too quick. Instead, he imprisoned him deep in Tartarus, in Sisyphus's old chamber. Hades would remain conscious, aware, able to think and feel, but utterly helpless. He'd watch his domain transform. He'd know his family was suffering, and he could do absolutely nothing about it. Psychological torture perfected by someone who'd had literal ages to plan it. But before completing his conquest, Chronos made one critical error. He underestimated Hades' final command. "Hecate," Hades called out. "Take her! Take Melinoë to the crossroads! Keep her safe! Train her!" Hecate, the witch of the crossroads, understood immediately. She grabbed the infant, snatched up the sleeping Hypnos, wrong place, wrong time, and the unfinished family portrait. Then she fled, her magic carrying her into the liminal spaces between realms, places where even time's grasp is uncertain. Behind her, Persephone's scream cut short as she too froze in temporal prison. The house of Hades fell silent. Chronos had won his first battle without spilling a single drop of blood. Time had returned, and every god, every mortal, every being in existence would learn what happens when you try to imprison infinity itself. But, and here's the twist no one saw coming, by letting Hecate escape with Melinoë, Chronos had planted the seed of his own defeat. Because that infant would grow up to become the one person in existence capable of doing something even time couldn't predict. She'd show him mercy. Part 2. The Titan Who Devoured History. To understand Chronos' master plan, we need to journey back, way back, before Olympus, before Zeus's lightning, before the gods as we know them. We need to go to the age of Titans. In Supergiant Games' version of Greek mythology, Chronos represents a deliberate fusion of two figures historically conflated: Chronos the Titan King and Chronos the primordial embodiment of time. This blending isn't accidental. It gives the character connection to both physical Titan power and the abstract, universal force of temporal flow. He's both being and concept, flesh and metaphor. A villain you can fight but can't truly kill, because how do you kill time itself? Born from Gaia, Earth, and Uranus, Sky, Chronos was the youngest of 12 original Titans, those primordial beings who ruled before gods walked the world. In those ancient days, the cosmos operated differently. The Titans weren't the cruel monsters later propaganda would paint them as. They were forces of nature, given form, representing the world in its raw, untamed state. Chronos' reign, what he later called his Golden Age, was defined by order and stability. Interestingly, Aphrodite would later describe his rule as overall boring, which tells you everything. For a goddess of passion, beauty, and chaotic love, to find an era dull suggests Chronos prioritized predictability over dynamism. Time flowed steadily. Seasons cycled precisely. Everything had its place and stayed there. Structure without soul, order without freedom. With his sister consort Rhea, Chronos had 6 children: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. And with their births came prophecy, that ancient curse that's plagued divine families since the beginning. These children, prophecy declared, would overthrow their father just as Chronos had overthrown his own father Uranus. Now, In traditional Greek mythology, Chronos' solution was horrific. He devoured each child at birth, swallowing them whole to imprison them in his stomach. But here's where Hades' law diverges. The game establishes that this particular atrocity was actually committed by Hyperion, not Chronos. Hades himself notes that Chronos was actually a better father than Hyperion was to his daughters, which raises an interesting question. If Chronos didn't eat his children, how did he try to prevent the prophecy? Based on what we see in-game, we can infer he was controlling and possessive rather than outright monstrous. He kept them close, watched them carefully, tried to ensure their loyalty through a combination of authority and fear. But ultimately, his paranoia became self-fulfilling. By treating them as threats, he made them enemies. Rhea, however, was cleverer than her husband realized. When Zeus was born, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to Chronos. He swallowed it without question. Perhaps arrogance, perhaps haste, perhaps simple assumption that his wife would never dare deceive him. Meanwhile, Zeus was spirited to Crete, raised in secret, growing strong while planning revenge. When Zeus came of age, he returned with his sisters, Hestia, who crafted a firearm so powerful she'd later throw it into Tartarus, Demeter, and Hera. With his brothers Hades and Poseidon, freed through trickery, they formed the Olympians. They raised their standard. They gathered allies. And they launched the Titanomachy, the great war between titans and gods. The war was brutal and long. Titans were primordial forces with power beyond mortal comprehension. But the younger gods had crucial advantages: innovation against stagnation, adaptability against rigidity. They had Zeus's Aegis shield and Hestia's terrible fire. They had tactics the Titans couldn't predict, because the Titans thought in terms of how things had always been, not how they might be. The final battle was savage. Chronos, for all his mastery over time, found himself overwhelmed. His 6 children, the ones he'd feared would betray him, surrounded him with fury and vengeance in their eyes. And they didn't just want to kill him. They wanted to ensure he could never return. So they used his own scythe. That curved golden blade that had helped establish his power became the instrument of his destruction. They cut him apart. Not just killed, dismembered. Sliced through divine flesh again and again until the Titan of Time was scattered into innumerable fragments. Then came the crucial step: separation. Each piece was taken to the deepest, darkest corners of Tartarus and hidden separately. The logic was sound. If his body was scattered, if each fragment was isolated, then Chronos could never reconstitute himself. Time itself had been divided and conquered. Those golden scars marking Chronos' body in Hades 2? Those aren't just wounds. They're seams. Places where his shattered form was eventually stitched back together by forces the Olympians never anticipated. Like kintsugi, that Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, Chronos' scars don't represent weakness. They celebrate survival, endurance, the terrible patience of time itself. For ages, Chronos existed fragmented. Not dead. Titans don't die easily. But not truly alive. Scattered, diminished, imprisoned in creation's bowels, guarded by his son Hades, who took the underworld specifically to ensure Titans never rose again. The Olympians grew confident. Generations passed. Centuries became millennia. Gods fell in love, had dramas, interfered in mortal affairs. Life continued. And all the while, deep in Tartarus, something was stirring. Because here's the thing about time: it's patient, it's persistent, and it's inevitable. For a being who embodies temporal flow, freedom was never a question of if, only when. And when that moment came, When Chronos finally reconstituted and broke free, he would show the cosmos exactly what happens when you try to cage infinity. The real question wasn't whether he'd escape. It was whether anyone would be prepared for what he'd become after spending eons planning his revenge in scattered pieces of consciousness. Spoiler, they weren't. Part 3. The Cult That Time Forgot. Here's where the story takes its first truly chilling turn, because Chronos didn't escape through his own power alone. He had help. Patient, devoted, fanatical help that had been working toward his return for longer than anyone realized. Enter the Satyrs. In the first Hades game, players encounter Satyr cultists in the Temple of Styx, the deepest region before reaching the surface. Zagreus notes their presence with confusion. What are these creatures doing here? Why such pronounced hatred for the House of Hades? Why does Hades himself seem quietly concerned despite their relatively minor threat? The answer connects directly to Chronos' resurrection, and it's been hiding in plain sight the entire time. These weren't random squatters. They were worshippers of the Titan of Time, gathering in secret to perform rituals necessary for his return. The Temple of Styx, with its serpentine statues and ancient architecture, provided perfect cover. And here's the detail that makes it brilliant. In Greek mythology, the serpent is a symbol associated with Chronos. Some versions depict him with a snake's lower body. Throughout the temple, serpent imagery is everywhere. Vipers carved into walls, snake motifs in the stonework, hidden in plain sight. The satyrs themselves are fascinating choices for cultists. Traditionally, they're depicted as hedonistic nature spirits interested in wine and revelry, not serious worship. But these particular satyrs demonstrate completely different character, organized, purposeful, willing to engage in practices most would find abhorrent. Blood sacrifice. When questioned about his resurrection, Chronos reveals the key detail. Blood sacrifices helped. Think about that. The dead don't bleed. Shades haunting the underworld have no physical blood to spill. This means the satyrs conducted their rituals while alive, or used living creatures, pouring blood onto Chronos' scattered fragments buried deep in Tartarus. There's dark poetry in this. Blood, essence of life and vitality, used to resurrect a being whose very nature embodies endings and inevitable decay. But perhaps that's precisely why it worked. Life and death, time and blood, are inextricably linked. Every heartbeat is a clock tick. Every pulse is a moment passing. The satyrs wear an hourglass insignia, marking them as Chronos' faithful. The hourglass becomes a recurring motif throughout Hades 2, appearing on followers, in Tartarus' architecture, even in Chronos' own design. His collar features Roman numerals like a clock face. His body has an literal hourglass figure. He doesn't just control time, he is time, down to his physical form. Now, here's where speculation enters, though it's speculation built on solid foundation. Some players theorize about inside help, a traitor who facilitated Chronos' return. One theory points to Sisyphus, that cunning king with every reason to hate the gods. But Chronos' own words complicate this. Blood sacrifices require blood, and Sisyphus has been dead for millennia. Another possibility, suggested by the presence of mortal Chronos followers on the surface, is that Eris, goddess of strife and discord, may have subtly encouraged cult formation. Someone who thrives on conflict would certainly benefit from a titan threatening the Olympian order. There's also an unintentional contribution worth noting. In the first game, Zagreus unlocks weapon aspects using Titan blood. Each use activated ancient Titan essence. If that blood contained traces of Chronos' power, then Zagreus' attempts to grow stronger may have inadvertently fed energy back into the scattered Titan. Even more intriguing, In original myths, baby Zagreus was killed by Titans and, before dying, transformed into Chronos himself while trying to escape. Based on this mythological connection, it's possible, though unconfirmed, that Zagreus's repeated deaths and resurrections in the first game created some kind of resonance, a bridge Chronos could use to pull himself together. The exact mechanics remain mysterious, which feels appropriate for a being of his nature. Time doesn't explain itself. It simply is. What we know for certain: the satyrs provided blood, will, and devotion. They performed dark rituals in the Temple of Styx, directly above where Chronos's fragments lay buried. They called to him through time itself, promising vengeance, restoration, return to his golden age. And time, patient as always, answered. The reconstitution wasn't instantaneous. Chronos exists across multiple temporal states simultaneously. But when he was ready, when his form coalesced sufficiently, when the moment was precisely right, he emerged from Tartarus not as prisoner, but as conqueror. The satyrs had succeeded. Their god returned. And now, with their master free, they would serve as his army, his enforcers, his faithful witnesses to the revenge enacted upon those who'd dared imprison infinity. The cult of the hourglass had achieved their greatest triumph. Now came the hard part, watching time itself show the cosmos what happens when you try to lock eternity in a cage. And here's the twist within the twist. The cult succeeded so well, were so devoted, that they never questioned whether their plan was what Chronos actually needed. They gave him vengeance. But as we'll discover, what he truly craved, what he'd been missing for eons, was something their blood sacrifices could never provide. Family. Part 4. The Master Manipulator. Chronos's true genius wasn't his temporal powers, though those were formidable. It was his strategic mind, his ability to manipulate the most powerful beings in existence into serving his purposes without them realizing they'd been played. His first major target after resurrection was perhaps the most audacious: the three fates themselves. In Greek mythology, the fates, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, are among existence's ultimate powers. They weave destiny's threads, determining life, fortune, and death for every mortal and even influencing gods. Even Zeus, king of Olympus, is bound by their decrees. For Chronos to truly succeed, the fates had to be neutralized, because if they remained active, weaving their threads, they could potentially unweave his entire scheme before it came to fruition. But how do you locate beings who exist outside normal space, in places beyond divine perception? When Chronos demanded their location from Hades, his son genuinely didn't know. The fates guard their privacy jealously. So Chronos turned to someone who did know: Chaos. Chaos is the primordial void from which all existence emerged. Their omniscience isn't a skill, it's simply what they are. They exist everywhere and everywhen simultaneously. And here's where Chronos' manipulation becomes masterful. He approached Chaos with apparent humility and curiosity. No demands, no threats, just questions, philosophical discussion, expressed interest in understanding Chaos's power. He presented himself as a seeker of knowledge, someone imprisoned so long he simply wanted to understand how the cosmos had changed. It was a perfect performance. Chaos, existing beyond conventional morality or concern, saw no reason to withhold information. What could one Titan do with knowledge? What threat could he pose? So Chaos, unaware of the scheme unfolding, used their omniscience to locate the three fates and revealed their location. Chronos later admitted he deliberately deceived Chaos, doing so primarily to test the magnitude of their power. This reveals something crucial about his character. He's not just vengeful. He's intellectually curious. Despite imprisonment, despite suffering, he maintains almost scientific fascination with how things work. He wanted to know if he could manipulate even primordial forces, and he succeeded. Armed with the Fate's location, Chronos moved swiftly. He captured all 3 Weavers of Destiny and banished them somewhere in the underworld's depths. Unlike family members, he froze in time. The Fates were sent away, hidden so remotely they couldn't interfere. They remained conscious, aware, but utterly unable to reach out and alter threads they'd spent eternity weaving. Now here's a fascinating detail revealed later. The Fates didn't entirely mind this imprisonment. They describe their banishment as a respite from endless weaving, a break from exhausting responsibility of managing every fate in existence. They'd never enjoyed that duty. The burden of determining destinies, making arbitrary decisions affecting countless lives, had worn on them across eons. Chronos's banishment, intended as a threat neutralization, inadvertently gave them something they'd secretly craved: freedom from responsibility. With the Fates removed, something profound happened to cosmic order. Destiny became uncertain. The future, previously a carefully woven tapestry, became more fluid, more subject to individual choice. This wasn't just a side effect of Chronos's plan, it was integral to it. Because if fate was uncertain, if the future wasn't predetermined, then his revenge could unfold in ways even gods couldn't predict. But Chronos wasn't done. His next target, the fundamental functioning of the underworld itself. In natural order, when mortals die, their souls travel to Erebus, the darkness surrounding the underworld. There they're processed, judged, sent to appropriate destinations. This system, overseen by Hades and maintained by beings like Thanatos and Charon, had operated smoothly for millennia. It was one of existence's few absolute constants. Death leads to the underworld, and the underworld processes the dead. Chronos deliberately disrupted this system. By imprisoning Hades and freezing Thanatos in time, he created a situation where arriving souls had nowhere to go. They couldn't enter Erebus properly, couldn't be processed, couldn't find rest. So they stayed on the surface. Their bodies remained animated, but without divine guidance that usually shepherds them to rest, these corpses became confused, directionless, and easy to manipulate. They weren't undead in the traditional sense, they were unprocessed, lost souls in physical form. And here's the cruel genius. If you strike down a member of this army in battle, they can't truly die. Death requires processing through the underworld, and Chronos had deliberately broken that system. So the undead simply rise again, over and over, an inexhaustible force wearing down even the mightiest defenders. This army marched on Mount Olympus. For years, literal years according to the law, Olympian gods fought back these forces. Zeus threw lightning. Ares swung his blade. Athena devised strategies. But they were fighting an enemy that couldn't be permanently defeated. Every undead soldier destroyed would return, while gods themselves grew slowly, inevitably more exhausted. Attacks grew in intensity. What started as manageable skirmishes evolved into desperate defensive battles. The gods, who'd never truly known fear, began understanding what it meant to face an enemy that couldn't be stopped, only delayed. All of this, the entire war structure, was deliberately designed by Chronos. He wasn't just attacking. He was applying pressure, creating situations where Olympians would be too distracted, too exhausted, too focused on survival to mount effective counterattack against him in the underworld. He fought on 2 fronts while forcing enemies to fight on one. He controlled the underworld through direct presence. He controlled the surface through strategic manipulation of systems he'd deliberately broken. This is what makes Chronos such a formidable antagonist. He doesn't rely purely on strength, though he has that in abundance. He doesn't depend solely on temporal powers, though they're nearly impossible to counter. He's a strategist who understands systems, leverage points, and how to make others dance to his tune without realizing they're doing it. Even chaos, primordial void existing beyond mortal concerns, was manipulated into serving Chronos' ends. Even the fates, who weave destiny itself, were removed from the board through cleverness rather than force. Chronos is patient. Chronos is cunning. And Chronos, above all, understands that master plans aren't about brute force. They're about making enemies defeat themselves while you watch from the shadows, one hand always on the clock, always knowing that time, inevitably, is on your side. Part 5. The Golden Age That Never Was. When Chronos speaks of his Golden Age, his voice carries a mixture of nostalgia and bitterness. He genuinely believes his rule was superior to the chaos of the Olympian era. He sees himself not as a tyrant, but as a wise administrator who brought order to a universe that desperately needed it. But what was this Golden Age actually like? The evidence suggests something complex. Aphrodite's description of his reign as overall boring is particularly telling. She's a goddess of passion, beauty, love, all things that thrive on spontaneity and emotional intensity. For her to find an era dull suggests Chronos prioritized stability and predictability over dynamic change. Imagine a world where everything runs like clockwork, quite literally. Seasons change at precisely the right moments. Harvests arrive when expected. Storms follow predictable patterns. There's no chaos, no uncertainty, but also no room for surprise or innovation. It's a world of perfect order, which sounds appealing until you realize that perfect order leaves no space for individual choice or spontaneous joy. Chronos, as the embodiment of time itself, represents cyclical repetition. Days become weeks, weeks become months, months become years, and every year follows the same pattern as the last. For mortals, this creates security. You know what to expect. You can plan. You can build with confidence that tomorrow will be much like today. But for gods, beings who exist across vast spans of time, this repetition becomes suffocating. There's no room for growth, no opportunity for change. Everything is as it was and ever shall be. World without end. Hades himself notes that Chronos was actually a better father than Hyperion was to his daughters, which is faint praise indeed. Based on what we can gather from the game's lore, while Chronos wasn't actively cruel or abusive like some titans, he was controlling and possessive. He loved his children in his own way, but that love was conditional on their obedience. When prophecy warned him they would overthrow him, he couldn't trust them to choose loyalty. Instead, he tried to control their fates. This reveals something fundamental about his character. He doesn't understand agency. He doesn't comprehend why beings would choose to deviate from what he perceives as the optimal path. For him, rebellion isn't just disobedience, it's illogical. Why would anyone want to disrupt the perfect order he'd established? When his children did rebel, it must have genuinely confused him as much as it angered him. He'd given them existence, given them power, given them places in his ordered cosmos. What more could they want? Freedom. The concept was probably alien to him. In a perfectly ordered world, freedom is just a word for the chaos that ruins everything. The Titanomachy, then, wasn't just a war between generations. It was a philosophical conflict between order and freedom, between predetermined destiny and chosen fate. The Titans represented a cosmos where everything had its place and stayed there. The Olympians represented a world where gods and mortals alike could shape their own destinies, make their own choices, even their own mistakes. Zeus, Hades, Poseidon, and their siblings didn't overthrow Chronos purely out of power hunger. They wanted to exist in a world where tomorrow could be different from today, where individual choices mattered, where innovation and change were possible. They wanted a future that wasn't just an endless repetition of the past. Chronos' defeat represented the triumph of that philosophy. The Golden Age ended not because it was evil, but because it was static. And a static world is a dead world, even if it's perfectly ordered. But here's what makes Chronos' return so dangerous. He doesn't understand why his Golden Age ended. He sees his overthrow as betrayal, as ingratitude, as the ultimate injustice. He genuinely believes that if he can reclaim power, if he can restore the old order, then everything will be better. Not just for him, but for everyone. This makes him more than a simple villain seeking revenge. He's an idealist with a profoundly different vision of what reality should be. He looks at the Olympian era with its wars, its petty conflicts, its drama and chaos, and thinks, this is what they chose over my perfect order. He sees the suffering of mortals caught in divine conflicts and believes his structured world would have prevented all of it. And you know what? He's not entirely wrong. The Olympian era is messy. Gods do interfere in mortal affairs, often to the mortal's detriment. There are wars, plagues, divine punishments, and arbitrary fates handed down by capricious immortals. The world isn't fair, isn't just, isn't even particularly sensible half the time. But it's alive. It's dynamic. It's a world where individuals, mortal and divine alike, have genuine agency, can make real choices, can change their circumstances through will and action. It's a world where tomorrow might be better than today because people can work to make it so. Chronos can't see this value. To him, all that freedom just looks like disorder, like a cosmic garden gone wild and overgrown. He wants to prune it back, restore the neat rows, make everything predictable again. His golden age wasn't golden for everyone. It was golden for those who fit neatly into their assigned roles, who never questioned their place, who accepted that this was how things were and always would be. For anyone else, for anyone who wanted more, who dreamed of different possibilities, it was a gilded cage. When Chronos returns and promises to restore this golden age, he's not lying. He genuinely plans to create that ordered world again. He just doesn't realize that most beings, given the choice, would rather live in beautiful, chaotic freedom than perfect, boring order. The tragedy of Chronos isn't that he's evil. It's that he's become so convinced of the rightness of his vision that he can't comprehend any alternative. He's time itself, unchanging and inevitable, and he cannot understand why anyone would want time to be anything other than what it has always been. This inflexibility, this absolute certainty in his worldview, is both his greatest strength and his fundamental weakness. It makes him implacable, unstoppable, relentless in pursuit of his goals. But it also blinds him to possibilities he can't imagine, to solutions he would never consider, to futures that don't fit his narrow definition of how things should be. The Golden Age Chronos promises is a promise of stagnation dressed up as stability, of control masquerading as peace. And that's why, despite his power, despite his temporal mastery, despite his claim to be restoring something good, he must be stopped. Not because order is bad, but because order without freedom, structure without growth, predictability without possibility isn't a golden age at all. It's just time standing still. And nothing that stands still can truly be called alive. Part 6. The Army of the Undead. The siege of Mount Olympus began quietly. At first, it was just a few shambling forms at the mountain's base. Confused mortals who had died but couldn't find their way to rest. The gods barely noticed. After all, strange phenomena occurred regularly around sites of divine power. But the trickle became a stream. The stream became a flood. And soon, Mount Olympus was under full assault by an army unlike any the gods had faced before. These weren't glorious warriors of ancient battles. They weren't legendary heroes or fearsome monsters. They were simply dead mortals, their bodies animated by the broken machinery of death itself. They didn't hunger for flesh like zombies of horror tales. They didn't crave violence for its own sake. They were directionless, purposeless beings caught in a state that should have been impossible. Dead, but not at rest. Chronos had disrupted the fundamental process by which death operates in the cosmos. When a mortal dies, their soul is supposed to separate from their body and travel to Erebus, where Charon ferries them across the Styx, and they enter Hades' domain for judgment and assignment to their final destination. It's a process that has operated flawlessly for millennia, managed by a sophisticated divine bureaucracy. By imprisoning Hades and freezing Thanatos in time, Chronos didn't just attack individuals. He attacked the system itself. The House of Hades ceased to function as the processing center for departed souls. The rivers stopped flowing, the gates remained closed, and souls arriving from the mortal world found themselves trapped in their deceased bodies, unable to move forward, unable to find peace. The Satyr cultists, under Chronos' direction, organized these wandering dead. They gave them purpose, direction, a reason to keep moving. March on Mount Olympus, they were told. Attack the gods who allowed this to happen to you. Some might question how Chronos could control such a vast army from his position in the underworld. The answer lies in the satyrs themselves. They served as his officers, his field commanders, organizing the undead into formations, directing their movements, ensuring the assault remained coordinated rather than dissolving into random chaos. The undead army had one crucial advantage. They couldn't be permanently defeated. When an Olympian struck one down, that body would simply lie there until the cosmic machinery tried to process its death. But that machinery was broken. So after a short time, the body would rise again, ready to continue the assault. It was war of attrition, where only one side could actually be worn down. The Olympians, for all their power, had never faced an enemy like this. They were accustomed to fighting monsters, titans, giants, enemies that, while powerful, could be killed. Victory meant destruction. But how do you achieve victory against an enemy that cannot be destroyed? Zeus hurled his lightning bolts, incinerating dozens with each strike. But they would rise again, charred but functional. Ares waded into battle with his massive blade, cutting down enemies with the skill of the war god himself. But corpses don't fear death, and they rose to fight him again. Athena devised brilliant strategies, traps, formations that should have turned the tide. But tactical genius means little when your enemy doesn't care about casualties and can't actually die. The siege went on for years. Not weeks or months, but actual years of constant warfare according to the game's law. The gods began to rotate shifts, resting when they could, but never able to fully let their guard down. Mount Olympus, that shining beacon of divine power, became a fortress under constant assault. The beautiful temples were fortified. The gardens were turned into defensive positions. Every god, no matter their primary domain, was pressed into military service. And still, the undead came. Prometheus, the Titan who had sided with the Olympians during the original Titanomachy, saw an opportunity in this chaos. He'd been imprisoned by Zeus for giving fire to humanity. and resentment had festered during his long captivity. As revealed in the game, when Chronos' war began, Prometheus joined him, adding his strategic mind and his own forces to the assault. No longer was this just mindless undead shuffling forward. Now there was genuine tactical coordination, intelligent command, and the expertise of someone who had fought in the original war against the gods. Prometheus leads the assault on Mount Olympus itself, becoming one of the major bosses Melinoë must face on the surface route. Typhon, the father of all monsters, that legendary being who nearly defeated Zeus himself in ancient times, was also recruited to Chronos' cause. The game establishes that Typhon was sealed under Mount Etna after his original defeat, but Chronos freed him. Typhon's sheer size and power made him nearly unstoppable. His 100 dragon heads could devastate armies. His shadow could blot out the sun. With Typhon leading portions of the assault, the Olympians faced not just an unkillable army, but genuinely existential threats to their very existence. The father of all monsters created a storm around the palace of Zeus that even the king of the gods couldn't dispel, trapping the Olympians in their own fortress. The war created a terrible paradox. The Olympians needed to defeat Chronos to end the assault, but to reach Chronos, they would have to abandon their defensive positions on Olympus. If they did that, the undead army would simply march past them and overrun the sacred mountain. But if they stayed to defend, they could never address the root cause of the problem. They were pinned in place by an enemy that required no supply lines, no rest, and no motivation beyond the broken cosmic machinery that kept their bodies moving. Melinoë, during her journeys to the surface in the game, is shocked and disgusted to discover that Chronos has recruited the dead to fight for him. Unlike mortals, who might not immediately grasp the violation this represents, Melinoë understands. As a chthonic goddess, as someone raised to respect the sacred nature of death and the afterlife, she recognizes this as one of Chronos' greatest sins. The dead are supposed to find peace, rest, closure. They're supposed to be beyond the conflicts of the living. To forcibly conscript them into an army, to trap them in a state of unending servitude, is an abomination against the natural order itself. This army reveals something crucial about Chronos' character. He's willing to cause infinite suffering to achieve his goals. Every member of his undead army is a soul in torment, trapped between life and death, unable to rest, unable to end their existence. Multiply that by thousands, by tens of thousands, and you begin to grasp the scale of suffering Chronos is willing to inflict. He's not just cruel, he's cruelly efficient. He took a broken system and weaponized it. He took a cosmic function that should bring peace and twisted it into an engine of war. And he did it all with the patient calculation of someone who knows that time, ultimately, is on his side. The Olympians could fight forever, could defend their mountain for centuries, could refuse to yield an inch of ground. But forever is just another word for until you make a mistake. And everyone makes mistakes eventually. Exhaustion leads to errors. Errors lead to openings. And once the defense is cracked, even slightly, the tide would be impossible to stop. Chronos' undead army wasn't just a military strategy. It was a philosophical statement. He was showing the gods what happens when the natural order is disrupted. He was demonstrating that even death itself can be perverted, twisted, made into a weapon. He was proving that the Olympian era, for all its supposed freedom and dynamism, had created systems that could be exploited, broken, turned against themselves. And he was winning, not through glorious victories or decisive battles, but through the slow, inexorable pressure of time itself. Wearing them down, grinding them into exhaustion, ensuring that when the final confrontation came, The gods would be too tired, too desperate, too broken to effectively resist. The undead army marched. The siege continued. And Chronos, from his throne in the House of Hades, watched with the patience of one who knows that in the end, time conquers all. Part 7. The Transformation of Tartarus. Before Chronos' return, Tartarus was a place of punishment and imprisonment. The deepest, darkest region of the underworld, it housed the worst of the worst, beings too dangerous or too wicked for any other fate. It was a maze of stone corridors, where tormented souls screamed into the void, and ancient evils remained locked away behind barriers even gods hesitated to cross. Then Chronos took control, and everything changed. The Titan didn't just occupy Tartarus, he remade it in his own image. The stone corridors remained, but now they were threaded with golden machinery. Massive gears turned in the walls, their teeth meshing with mathematical precision. Clockwork mechanisms of impossible complexity rose from the floor, their purposes unknowable, but their message clear. This was no longer just a prison. It was a fortress, a seat of power, the heart of Chronos' new domain. The sands of Chrysos, named after a minor god personifying gold itself, began flowing through Tartarus like rivers of time made visible. These golden sands empty into a pool inside the House of Hades, creating a constant reminder that time is flowing, always flowing, grinding everything down to dust eventually. Walking through Tartarus now means wading through these sands, feeling them shift beneath your feet, hearing them whisper as they move. It's unsettling in a way the old stone corridors never were. Stone is solid, permanent. Sand flows, shifts, offers no firm foundation. Everything in Tartarus now feels temporary, unstable, subject to change at Chronos' whim. The most striking addition to Tartarus' architecture is the hourglass pillars. These aren't just decorative, they're functional weapons. When destroyed, they create massive golden bubbles that freeze everything caught inside in temporal stasis. It's a miniature version of what Chronos did to Hades' family, trapping beings in time rather than space. These pillars serve multiple purposes. They're defensive mechanisms, protecting key areas from intruders. They're symbolic representations of Chronos' power, visible reminders that time itself rules here now. And they're a warning. Enter at your own risk, because in this place you might find yourself trapped forever in a single moment. Brimstone pillars complement the hourglass defenses, firing rotating pink beams that sweep across chambers. Combined with the temporal freezing effects, these create a nightmarish environment where Melinoë must constantly be aware of multiple threat types simultaneously. The battle isn't just against Chronos' minions, it's against the environment itself, which has been turned into an extension of the Titan's will. Spiked traps that activate when stepped on remain in place, familiar from the original Hades. But now they feel different in context. They're no longer just relics of Tartarus' prison function. They're part of a larger defensive network, coordinated with the temporal effects and energy beams to create overlapping fields of danger. The Roman numerals that mark the major chambers, V33-2I, count down like a clock ticking toward midnight. The final chamber bears not a numeral, but an hourglass symbol, marking it as the seat of power itself. This countdown creates a sense of inevitability as Melinoë progresses. You're not just moving through space, you're moving through time, counting down to the final confrontation with time itself. The Book of Shadows, that ancient tome that records knowledge of the underworld, describes the transformation with a chilling detail. The groaning wheels and machinery throughout the place have grown more prevalent since his return, suggesting long-dormant plans that came finally to fruition. This is crucial. The machinery wasn't built after Chronos escaped. It was already there, hidden in the depths, waiting. This suggests that Chronos had been planning his escape, preparing for his return, for far longer than anyone realized. Perhaps since the moment of his original imprisonment. Imagine being cut into pieces and scattered across the deepest pit of existence. Imagine being conscious through all of it, aware but unable to act, powerless but not destroyed. Most beings would go mad. Most would lose themselves to despair or rage. But Chronos is time, and time is patient. While his fragments lay separated, unable to communicate, unable to coordinate, he was planning. Each piece independently working toward the same goal, eventual return. And somehow, impossibly, he managed to plant the seeds of that return even in his fragmented state. The transformation serves multiple purposes in Chronos' master plan. Practically, it creates a fortress that's nearly impossible to assault. The Olympians could potentially force their way in, but it would cost them dearly, and they're already exhausted from defending against the undead army on the surface. Symbolically, remaking Tartarus demonstrates Chronos' power and authority. He's not just occupying Hades' domain, he's improving it in his view. He's bringing order, structure, the perfect clockwork precision that characterized his golden age. Psychologically, the transformation serves to demoralize anyone who sees it. The House of Hades was a symbol of stability in the underworld, a place that had stood unchanged for ages. Seeing it remade so thoroughly, so completely, drives home the point that nothing is beyond Chronos' reach. The satyrs who serve as Chronos' worshippers now reside throughout Tartarus. They're no longer skulking in shadows or hiding in remote temples. They walk openly through corridors that were once forbidden to them, treated as masters rather than intruders. Their presence reinforces the new order. The old rules don't apply anymore. But there's one element Chronos didn't account for, one small detail that subverts his perfect clockwork control. Hades himself is still present in Tartarus, imprisoned in Sisyphus's old chamber. Chronos could have frozen him in time like the others, but chose to keep him conscious and suffering instead. And that choice creates an opportunity. When Melinoë encounters Hades during her runs through Tartarus, he offers her boons, divine blessings that strengthen her against the trials ahead. Even imprisoned, even powerless to free himself, Hades finds a way to resist. His boons often specifically target Chronos' tactics, like Deep Descent, which reduces the number of minions Chronos can summon. This is Chronos' one oversight in his otherwise perfect transformation of Tartarus. He wanted Hades to witness his triumph, to see his domain remade and his family imprisoned. But by keeping Hades conscious and present, he gave the underworld's legitimate king a chance to aid the rebellion. The transformation of Tartarus is complete, except for this one small crack in the facade. And as any architect knows, structures are only as strong as their weakest points. Golden machinery turns, clockwork gears mesh, sands flow endlessly, and in a small chamber, surrounded by temporal machinery and divine chains, Hades waits patiently for his daughter to reach him, ready to give her every advantage he can. Even time, it seems, cannot erase a father's love for his child. Part 8. Time as a Weapon. The battle against Chronos isn't like any other boss fight in the Hades series. Against Hades himself in the first game, you faced a formidable opponent with powerful attacks, but one who followed comprehensible patterns. Every boss in the series, no matter how challenging, operated within certain understood parameters. Chronos breaks those parameters. He doesn't just fight you, he fights reality itself. His most fundamental advantage is his mastery over time. In normal combat throughout Hades 2, when Melinoë charges an Omega attack, time slows down. This gives the player a moment to aim, to position, to make tactical decisions under pressure. It's a crucial mechanic that defines the gameplay experience. Against Chronos, this doesn't work. Time cannot be slowed when you're fighting time itself. The game itself tells you cannot pause during this battle. Every moment is in real time, flowing at Chronos' pace, not yours. This creates immediate disorientation. Players who have spent hours mastering the careful timing of Omega attacks suddenly find their muscle memory betrayed. The slowdown they've relied on is gone. Selena's Hex, which slows enemies, is useless. Any boon or ability that manipulates temporal flow simply doesn't function. Chronos has nullified an entire category of combat tactics just by existing. His scythe, that curved golden weapon stained with the history of his own dismemberment, is impossibly long and impossibly fast. When he swings it, reality seems to warp around the blade. Time scars appear where the scythe passes, rifts in temporal flow that explode moments after the initial strike. This means dodging the first attack isn't enough. You must also avoid the delayed detonation, the echo of violence that follows even after Chronos has moved on to his next action. The boss fight has two main phases, each with its own arena and mechanics, as documented in the Hades wiki. Phase 1 begins with Chronos summoning 6 Satyr supplicants. These aren't particularly powerful enemies individually, but they serve crucial purposes. They force Melinoë to divide her attention, making it harder to focus purely on Chronos. They can overwhelm through numbers if left unchecked. One of Hades' boons, Deep Descent, can reduce this summoning by 50%. A small mercy, but a significant one. 3 Satyrs are far more manageable than 6. Chronos' Phase 1 attacks include the dash. He moves impossibly fast, appearing at Melinoë's location and leaving a time rift trail that explodes moments later. You must dodge twice, once to avoid the initial dash, again to avoid the explosion. The scythe throw. His weapon flies in a circular arc, covering most of the arena. The only safe spot is directly in the dead zone at the center, requiring precise positioning. The time bubble. He creates a sphere of frozen time at his location and teleports away. If Melinoë touches this bubble, she's frozen until its duration ends. Against any other enemy, being stunned is bad. Against Chronos, it's almost certainly fatal. The Scythe Slash. Basic melee attacks that leave time rifts behind them. Again, the double dodge principle applies. As his health depletes, Chronos summons reinforcements. 2 elite enemies appear, either Satyr Vieromancers with their fire projectiles and summoned crawlers, or other elite variants. The arena becomes crowded, chaotic, testing Melinoë's ability to manage multiple threats. Phase 2 is where things become truly nightmarish. The arena transforms into a massive clock face, the symbolism blatant and inescapable. You're not just fighting in time, you're fighting on time, standing on its very representation. The stage is smaller now, more confined, giving Chronos and his summons less distance to cover. He retains all his Phase 1 attacks, but adds several new mechanics. Time implosion. Chronos raises his scythe and begins to charge what can only be described as a temporal supernova. The arena slowly darkens, except for one small area of light. After several seconds, everything outside that safe zone is annihilated. Instantly. This is the game's way of representing what it would look like if time itself decided to simply end you. There's no defense, no way to survive if you're caught in the blast zone. The only option is to identify the safe area and reach it, abandoning all offense to ensure survival. Time banners. 4 banners appear around the arena, creating expanding fields that grant Chronos and his minions the shielded buff, stacking up to 4 times. These banners can be destroyed, but doing so while avoiding Chronos' attacks requires split-second decision-making. Orb Pulse. Chronos teleports to the center of the arena and becomes invulnerable. He summons 6 sets of 2 orbs that move in waves around him, creating a bullet hell pattern that must be navigated while anticipating his next move. Tempests. New enemy types appear, spawned exclusively during Phase 2. These temporal constructs are faster and more aggressive than the Satyrs, applying constant pressure. According to player reports and community discussions, the difficulty spike between Phase 1 and Phase 2 has been compared to the difference between fighting Hades in the original game and fighting the hardest endgame content. Many players report needing 20 to 30 runs to finally defeat Chronos. This isn't because they're unskilled. It's because the fight demands perfect execution, mastery of mechanics that actively work against player instincts, and the ability to maintain focus during extended periods of high-pressure combat. But even after defeating Chronos, even after watching him dissolve into golden particles and collecting the zodiac sands that prove your victory, there's no real triumph. Because moments later, back at the crossroads, you'll receive word that Chronos has returned. He's reconstituted himself, standing once again in the house of Hades, ready to fight again. This is the ultimate expression of his power. Time cannot be killed. Time cannot be permanently defeated. Time simply is eternal and inevitable. You can shatter a clock, but moments continue to pass. You can stop a watch, but the universe keeps aging. Destroying Chronos' physical form is meaningless because he's not really physical. He's a concept given flesh, and concepts don't die when their flesh is torn. The realization is profound and disturbing. Melinoë hasn't just been fighting a powerful enemy. She's been fighting an opponent that literally cannot lose in any permanent sense. Every victory is temporary. Every defeat on his part is merely a delay. He'll always come back, always reform, always stand ready for another battle. This is why the entire structure of the game's plot revolves around finding a way to defeat him permanently. Not through superior combat skill, but through manipulation of the very temporal mechanics that make him unkillable. Zagreus must travel back in time to attack Chronos before he fully reconstitutes. The weapon must be Gigaros, Hades' spear, which hasn't killed Chronos before and thus isn't part of the temporal loop. The timing must be precise, coordinated across different points in history. Fighting Chronos teaches players a fundamental truth about the nature of time. You can't beat it through force. You can't outlast it through endurance. You can't trick it through cleverness. Time always wins because time is the arena in which all battles take place. You're not fighting an enemy on equal ground. You're fighting the ground itself. The only way to truly defeat time is to change the rules, to step outside the temporal flow, to attack from an angle that time itself cannot anticipate or defend against. And even then, victory isn't about destruction. It's about transformation, about convincing time that perhaps, just perhaps, there's a better way than the endless cycle of conquest and revenge. Part 9. The Plan Within the Plan. The first time Melinoë defeats Chronos, there should be celebration. Victory against time itself, even if temporary, is an achievement worthy of legend. But instead of triumph, there's something unexpected. Rather than returning to the crossroads as usual, Melinoë finds herself in a strange room within the house of Hades. It's Zagreus' bedroom, and there, lying on a couch, is her brother. Not frozen in time like the others, but sleeping peacefully, unaware of her presence. This is the first time Melinoë has truly seen Zagreus since she was an infant. She has no memories of him, only the painting and her dreams. But here he is, alive, real, her family finally within reach. Except something's wrong. The room looks different than it should. Newer, less worn. And Zagreus himself seems younger somehow. Melinoë realizes the truth. This isn't her present. This is the past. When Chronos was defeated, when his form dissolved, something about that moment created a temporal bridge. Melinoë has been granted access to a point in time before Chronos' escape, before the attack on the House of Hades, before everything went wrong. This is the key. This is the opportunity. In the game, Melinoë must interact with Zagreus' bed and choose to dream, which sends her spirit form into a ghostly state. She floats to the mirror of night in the corner of the room and pierces through it, entering the mist of memories, an astral pathway between times. Following this path, she hears a familiar voice. At the end stands Zagreus, surrounded by gold coins, visible through his own mirror of night. When Melinoë uses Project to communicate, she finally speaks to her brother for the first time. The first conversation between Melinoë and Zagreus is tentative, careful. From Zagreus' perspective, a strange woman has appeared, claiming to be his sister from the future. It's exactly the kind of absurd situation that seems to happen regularly in the House of Hades, but that doesn't make it less bizarre. Melinoë explains the situation. Chronos will escape, will attack their family, will plunge both Underworld and Olympus into war. Zagreus is skeptical. His father told him Chronos was permanently vanquished, cut into pieces and scattered. How could the Titan possibly return? But there's something in Melinoë's voice, in her desperation, in the precise way she describes things only someone from their family would know, that convinces him. Or at least, convinces him enough to listen. She tasks him with an investigation. Look for signs of Satyr activity beyond what's normal. Search for evidence of cult worship. Try to learn more about where exactly Chronos' fragments are hidden. Be discreet. Don't tell anyone, because if word gets out, it could change the timeline unpredictably. Zagreus agrees, though he admits this is probably the strangest thing he's been asked to do. Over multiple defeats of Chronos in the present, Melinoë returns to that room again and again through the mirror of night, each time having brief conversations with her brother. Slowly, painstakingly, they piece together the plan. Zagreus begins his investigation in his timeline, discovering exactly what Melinoë predicted. Unusual Satyr gatherings, evidence of blood sacrifices, signs of deliberate coordination that goes beyond random mischief. According to the game's lore, he tracks the source to a cave in the Temple of Styx. There, in secret chambers, the Satyr cult has been performing their rituals. And beneath the temple, in the deepest crevices of Tartarus, Zagreus discovers something chilling, evidence that Chronos is already beginning to reform. The fragments are pulling themselves together, slowly, imperceptibly, but inexorably. This means time is running out. In Melinoë's present, Chronos has already escaped. But in Zagreus' past, there's still a brief window where the Titan is vulnerable, reconstituting but not yet whole. The question becomes, what weapon can kill a Titan who's already been killed? What weapon can destroy something that hasn't fully formed yet? Zagreus puzzles over this across multiple conversations. It can't be any weapon that's already killed Chronos before, because temporal loops would prevent that from working twice. It can't be anything associated with the original Titanomachy, because those weapons are well known to the Titan, and he'd have defenses against them. Then, in a flash of inspiration documented in the game, Zagreus realizes the answer. Gigaros! Hades' legendary spear, locked away in the private chambers of the House of Hades, unused for centuries. It's powerful enough to kill a Titan. It hasn't been used against Chronos before, and it exists in both timelines, meaning Melinoë could theoretically access it in her present once Zagreus recovers it in the past. There's just one problem. Hades doesn't let anyone use Gigoros. The spear is kept under lock and key for reasons the Lord of the Underworld has never fully explained. Zagreus will need to steal it from his own father, use it to attack Chronos, and then leave it somewhere Melinoë can find it in the future. It's an absurdly complex plan involving temporal mechanics, theft from family, and attacking an enemy who technically hasn't fully manifested yet. But it's also the only plan that has any chance of working. Zagreus agrees to do it. For his sister he's never met. For his family that doesn't know they're in danger. For a future he won't be conscious to see, but that he can help save anyway. The game requires players to defeat Chronos at least 6 times total. After the 5th defeat, Zagreus reports back with good news. He's retrieved Gigoros. He's identified the exact location where Chronos is reforming. He's ready to strike. But there's one last complication that changes everything. Zagreus asks a question that shakes Melinoë's certainty. What exactly should I do with Chronos when I find him? Just kill him? Is that really the answer? It's a profound question from someone who, in the first game, spent countless runs trying to reconcile with his father, learning that family conflicts can be resolved through understanding rather than violence. Zagreus knows what it's like to be at odds with a parent. He knows that sometimes the answer isn't destruction, but dialogue. Melinoë's response is firm. Chronos must be stopped. He's caused too much suffering, destroyed too much, hurt too many people. There's no redemption for something like that. But Zagreus isn't entirely convinced, and this hesitation, this small seed of doubt, will grow into something that changes everything. The plan within the plan, the coordinated assault across time itself, represents the absolute peak of Melinoë and Hecate's tactical thinking. They're not just fighting an enemy. They're fighting across the 4th dimension, coordinating actions separated by years, but connected by purpose. It's warfare conducted on a level that most beings couldn't even comprehend, let alone execute. And it's all built on trust between siblings who barely know each other, connected only by blood and a shared determination to save their family. Zagreus will strike in the past. Melinoë will strike in the present. Together, across time, they'll deliver a blow that even the Titan of Time cannot withstand. At least, that's the theory. What neither of them anticipates is that Zagreus, when the moment comes, when he's standing over a partially formed Chronos with Gigoros in hand, will make a choice that contradicts everything they've planned. He'll choose mercy, and in doing so, he'll create something far more powerful than any weapon could achieve. Part 10. The Surface War. While Chronos consolidated power in the underworld, the war raged on the surface. And here's where the full scope of his master plan becomes clear. He wasn't just conquering one realm. He was orchestrating a 2-front war designed to stretch the Olympians so thin they'd eventually break. To reach the surface in Hades 2, Melinoë must first unlock it through an incantation. When she initially tries to ascend, she takes rapidly escalating damage. Her body is tied to the underworld, and the surface is hostile to her very existence. Only after performing another incantation can she survive there long enough to fight. The surface route consists of 4 regions: the city of Ephyra, the rift of Thessaly, Mount Olympus, and finally the summit. Each represents another layer of Chronos' assault on the divine order. The city of Ephyra once stood in solemn praise of Hades and Persephone. Now it's ransacked, overrun by Chronos' forces. Polyphemus, the famous Cyclops from Greek mythology, keeps careful watch over the docks, serving as the first major obstacle. The city's fall represents something crucial. Chronos isn't just attacking gods. He's dismantling the entire structure of worship and reverence that sustained them. Temples are destroyed. Shrines are defiled. The mortal world, which once looked to the gods for guidance, now sees only chaos and suffering. The Rift of Thessaly is a water channel cutting straight from Ephyra to Mount Olympus's base. It's convenient for naval assault, which is exactly why Chronos' forces use it. Eris, goddess of strife and discord, guards the beaches at Olympus's base. Eris's involvement is particularly interesting. As someone who thrives on conflict, she's a natural ally for Chronos. But based on what we see in the game, it's unclear whether she's fully committed to his cause or simply enjoying the chaos. She's the kind of being who would cheerfully watch the world burn if it meant witnessing spectacular conflict. Mount Olympus, itself, once a regal palace of the gods, now lies in ruin. And here's where we encounter one of the most tragic figures in this entire war: Prometheus. Prometheus, the Titan of foresight, originally sided with the Olympians during the First Titanomachy. He was punished by Zeus for giving fire to humanity, bound to a rock where an eagle would eat his regenerating liver every day until Heracles freed him. That punishment soured his opinion on the Olympians considerably. Now, according to the game, Prometheus has rejoined his Titan kin in their vendetta against the gods. He leads Chronos' assault on Mount Olympus itself, using his gift of foresight to stay perpetually 2 steps ahead of the defenders. When Melinoë confronts him in the game, Prometheus acknowledges her, saying he had a premonition of this very moment. He's calculated, resolute, always devising strategies and determining his next moves. Even some Olympians recognize that his vengeance against them is warranted. His suffering has convinced him that they're unfit to rule. But there's something more nuanced here. Despite his alliance with Chronos, Prometheus isn't purely villainous. He opposes the gods for the sake of mortal kind, believing they deserve better than capricious divine rulers. It's a principled stance, even if the methods are brutal. The game reveals that Prometheus is somehow familiar with Dora, that listless shade who shares Melinoë's tent, telling Melinoë that Dora forgot her memories of him for a reason. Based on Greek mythology, this connection likely relates to Prometheus's brother Epimetheus being married to Pandora, suggesting Dora might be a shade of that legendary figure. But the true horror awaits at the summit. Upon the highest peak of Mount Olympus stands the palace of Zeus, the god's seat of power, and besieging it is Typhon, the father of all monsters. Typhon is unlike any other enemy in the game. Where other bosses have capacity for thought and speech, Typhon appears to lack both. He speaks in simple bellows of hatred, working on single-minded instinct. He's a monster in its purest form, displaying no emotion other than deep rage. The Book of Shadows describes him perfectly. Monstrosity may be explained as that which violates all our senses, and usually most of them at once. Physically, Typhon is unspeakably massive and horrifying. His upper body is roughly humanoid, but composed of mounds of pulsing, grayish-blue flesh, pocked with golden spines and crimson eyes at irregular intervals. His head has 3 eyes, one grotesquely enlarged in the center of his forehead. His lower jaw is skinless. He has 2 sets of canine teeth, and his tongue is a serpent with another bulbous eye in its mouth. According to the lore, Typhon was once defeated by the gods and sealed under Mount Etna. Chronos freed him specifically to harry the Olympians. Typhon created a mighty storm around the palace of Zeus that even the king of the gods couldn't dispel, effectively trapping the Olympians in their own fortress. Here's what makes Typhon so terrifying. He's a danger to everything. The game establishes that Typhon has no love even for his own monstrous children, whom he would slaughter just as happily as any other living creature. Hades confirms that Typhon is a danger to every living thing in the universe, the one creature that all gods, heroes, monsters, and magical beings would likely work together to defeat. When Melinoë reaches the Summit in the game, the entire area is beset by the storm Typhon conjured. The peak is infested with his bizarre spawn, released as he climbs the summit searching for his archenemy. Even as Melinoë climbs, Typhon's various appendages seek her out. His tail slams down throughout the region, his eyes watch from unexpected places. The summit consists of 8 chambers according to the wiki, with 2 mandatory warden encounters before reaching Typhon himself. The environment is filled with exploding eggs that deal massive damage and eye spikes that burst through the ground. Fighting Typhon is unlike fighting any other boss in the game. His HP bar literally breaks and disappears at the start of the fight, indicating his overwhelming strength. He cannot truly be defeated through normal means. You can only drive him back temporarily. The father of all monsters attacks with eye beams of destructive light, gale force winds from his mouth creating whirlwinds across the battlefield, storm winds that push Melinoë around the arena, his massive tail slamming down with shockwaves, spawning eggs that hatch into dangerous monsters, retreating into the storm while his children fight for him. According to players who've faced him, Typhon is often considered harder than Chronos himself. The sheer visual chaos of the fight, with his appendages, spawned creatures, environmental hazards, and massive attacks, creates an overwhelming experience. But here's the crucial detail. Typhon isn't just muscle. Chronos freed him strategically. With Typhon besieging Olympus, the gods can't send reinforcements to help deal with the underworld situation. They're pinned, exhausted, barely holding their own fortress. It's the same strategy Chronos uses with his undead army. Overwhelming force that can't be truly defeated, only endured, gradually wearing down the defenders until they're too exhausted to resist effectively. The surface war reveals the full scope of Chronos' master plan. He's not just powerful, he's strategic. He understands that to truly win, you don't need to defeat your enemies directly. You just need to ensure they defeat themselves through exhaustion, desperation, and the slow erosion of hope. And for years, it worked perfectly. The Olympians fought bravely, using all their divine might. But they were fighting a war they couldn't win through conventional means. The undead army couldn't be permanently killed. Typhon couldn't be truly defeated. Prometheus's foresight meant their strategies were anticipated before they were implemented. It was only a matter of time before even the mighty Olympians fell. Unless someone could do the impossible, find a way to permanently defeat beings who, by their very nature, couldn't be permanently defeated. That someone would be Melinoë, and the solution wouldn't come through greater power or better strategy. It would come through something Chronos never anticipated, never planned for, never believed possible. Mercy. Part 11. The Unexpected Mercy. The moment arrives. Zagreus, armed with Gigaros, stands in the deepest pit of Tartarus before a partially reformed Chronos. The Titan isn't fully conscious yet, isn't capable of defending himself. He's vulnerable in a way he'll never be again. One thrust of the spear, and this entire nightmare timeline could be prevented. The attack on the House of Hades would never happen. Hades would never be imprisoned. Persephone would never be frozen. Melinoë's childhood wouldn't be stolen. All Zagreus has to do is strike. He doesn't. This moment, this choice, represents one of the most controversial decisions in Hades 2's narrative. Players who've spent dozens of hours fighting Chronos, who've witnessed his cruelty and suffered his temporal manipulations, react with confusion and frustration when Zagreus spares him. But understanding why requires understanding who Zagreus is. In the first Hades, Zagreus' entire arc revolves around family reconciliation. He spends the game believing his father is tyrannical and uncaring. But through repeated attempts, through conversations with everyone in the House of Hades, he learns that Hades isn't a villain. He's a father dealing with complicated circumstances. The game's ultimate resolution isn't Zagreus defeating Hades and leaving forever. It's them reaching understanding, establishing boundaries, learning to communicate. The ending shows them working together, respecting each other despite differences. So when Zagreus stands over Chronos, he's drawing on that experience. He's thinking about his own father, about how easily that situation could have ended in permanent alienation instead of reconciliation. Zagreus doesn't just spare Chronos, he talks to him, has a conversation with a partially formed Titan who's confused and vulnerable. And in that conversation, Zagreus offers something Chronos hasn't received in literal eons, genuine interest in his perspective. Why did you rule the way you did? What did you hope to achieve? What hurt you so badly that you're willing to hurt everyone else? These aren't questions that justify Chronos' actions, but they're questions that humanize him, that treat him as a being with motivations beyond simple evil. And for Chronos, who's spent ages in pieces, who's plotting revenge as the only purpose keeping him coherent, this is profoundly disorienting. Someone is listening. Someone cares. Someone sees him as more than just an enemy to be destroyed. Zagreus makes an offer. If Chronos agrees to abandon his plans, to truly try being part of the family, then Zagreus won't kill him. He'll help him fully reform. He'll give him a chance at the life he never had, where his children don't fear him, where his power brings order instead of oppression, where he can be the grandfather he never got to be. Chronos, in this vulnerable state, hesitates. He's spent so long planning revenge. Revenge has been his identity, his purpose, the one thing keeping his scattered fragments coherent enough to eventually reform. To give that up would be to give up himself. But Zagreus is offering something Chronos didn't know he wanted. Family. Real family. The kind where people choose to be together because they want to, not because they're forced to. Chronos agrees. Tentatively, uncertainly, but he agrees. And in that moment, something unprecedented happens according to the game's law. The timelines fracture. A new branch forms. In this branch, Chronos never attacks the House of Hades. He reforms fully with Zagreus' help. He becomes part of the family. He's there when Melinoë is born, holding his granddaughter with wonder in his eyes. He teaches her about time, about the cosmos, about being patient and thoughtful. He plays with her, the way a grandparent should. One particularly poignant scene from this alternate timeline shows young Melinoë playing hide-and-seek with Hecate in the halls of the House of Hades. But Hecate in this timeline isn't the mentor who trained her for war. She's just a family friend helping watch the children. The scene is so ordinary, so domestic, so suffused with simple joy that it becomes almost painful to witness when you know what the real timeline looks like. These alternate memories don't replace reality. They exist alongside it. According to the game, everyone in the House of Hades except Hecate suddenly remembers both timelines simultaneously. The one where they were attacked and imprisoned, and the one where they lived as a happy family with a reformed Chronos. Melinoë, in the present, suddenly has memories of a childhood she never lived. She remembers her grandfather teaching her to tell time, explaining temporal mechanics in gentle terms a child could understand. She remembers feeling loved, safe, cherished. And she also remembers being ripped away from her family as an infant, raised in isolation, trained to be a weapon. Both memories are real. Both timelines exist in superposition. The cognitive dissonance is overwhelming. Hades experiences perhaps the most profound confusion. He remembers his father imprisoning him, torturing him, destroying everything he built. But he also remembers his father apologizing, making amends, becoming a present and loving parent for the first time. Both versions of Chronos exist in his memory, and he doesn't know which one is truly his father. Persephone remembers being frozen in time, aware but helpless. She also remembers family dinners with Chronos, tentative at first but growing warmer over the years. She remembers him being gentle with Melinoë, the way he never was with his own children. But Chronos experiences both timelines. He remembers waging war, conquering the underworld, enacting his revenge. And he simultaneously remembers reforming, joining the family, being the grandfather he could have been. The weight of these dual memories, the stark contrast between who he was and who he could have been, creates an existential crisis. When Melinoë faces him in the present after performing the dissolution of time incantation and obtaining Gigaros, she's ready to destroy him permanently. But Chronos, holding both sets of memories, suddenly sees her not just as an enemy, but as his granddaughter. The little girl he taught about time, the child who called him grandpa with pure, innocent affection, the granddaughter he tortured by proxy, stealing her childhood and forcing her into a life of violence. The weight of these contradictions breaks something in Chronos. According to the game's ending, he releases Hecate from where she's been held prisoner. He stands down. He doesn't surrender out of fear or defeat, but out of genuine remorse. Because he's seen what he could have been, what he should have been, and the distance between that ideal and his actual actions is unbearable. This is why Zagreus's mercy works when violence couldn't. Killing Chronos would have just made him reform again, fueled by rage and righteousness. But showing him an alternative, giving him memories of genuine family love, created a conflict within the Titan that his own power couldn't resolve. You can't go back and unkill people, you can't reverse the suffering you've caused, but you can choose in this moment to be different, to be better, to stop the cycle. Chronos makes that choice, not because he's defeated, but because he's been given something he didn't know existed, a vision of what he could become if he let go of revenge. The controversial nature of this ending stems from the question, does mercy erase justice? Chronos caused immense suffering. He tortured Hades. He disrupted the natural order of death. He created an undead army that killed countless beings. He was willing to destroy everything to reclaim his power. Does a change of heart erase all of that? The game's answer is nuanced. Chronos isn't simply forgiven. The ending shows him working to repair the damage he caused, assisting Melinoë in hunting down alternate timeline versions of himself who still threaten reality. He's actively trying to atone, to prove through action that his change is genuine. After the true ending, players can encounter Chronos helping Melinoë fight other versions of himself and Typhon from alternate timelines, eliminating the possibility of them rising again. But it's uncomfortable for players who wanted to see him punished rather than redeemed. The game asks you to accept that sometimes the most powerful victory isn't destruction, but transformation. Zagreus's unexpected mercy breaks the cycle of violence that defined the relationship between Titans and Olympians for millennia. His choice rewrites not just the future, but the meaning of the past. It transforms Chronos from an irredeemable villain into a complex figure struggling with the weight of what he's done and what he could have been. And in doing so, it creates something far more powerful than any weapon. The possibility of genuine change. Even time itself, it seems, can be changed if someone is willing to take the risk. Part 12. The True Nature of Hecate. After everything, after the battles, the temporal manipulations, the reconciliation with Chronos, there's still one mystery remaining. One question that's hung over the entire story from the beginning. Who exactly is Hecate? The revelation comes in the epilogue, in a quiet scene in the hot springs at the crossroads. This is an optional scene that requires building relationship with Hecate and reaching the post-game content. Melinoë, having accomplished everything she set out to do, sits with Hecate in a moment of peace. And there, Hecate removes her mask. She has eyes, green eyes, glowing with power, identical to Melinoë's own. Because Hecate is Melinoë. Or rather, she's a version of Melinoë from an alternate timeline. A Melinoë who failed. Her story unfolds in calm, measured words. In her original timeline, Chronos escaped just as he did in the main narrative. Her family was imprisoned. She was saved and trained to fight the Titan. And she succeeded. She defeated Chronos permanently, or so she thought. But victory came at a terrible cost. In defeating Chronos, this alternate Melinoë became consumed by vengeance, by hatred, by single-minded focus on destroying her enemy. She lost parts of herself in the process. The gentle things, the kind things, the ability to see beyond rage and pain. She won the battle but lost her soul in the winning. After Chronos' death, she couldn't rest, couldn't stop. The war had defined her so completely that without it, she didn't know who she was. So she attempted something desperate. She used dream magic, the kind forbidden and dangerous, to enter Chronos' dying mind. Her intention was to erase him completely, to remove him from existence so thoroughly that he could never return. But something went wrong. Time and nightmare fused. The dream magic interacted with Chronos' temporal powers in ways she couldn't predict. Instead of destroying the Titan's consciousness, she was flung backward through time, not just a few years, but to the very beginning, to the birth of Chronos himself. She found herself as an infant at the bank of the river Copitus, with no identity, no history, no past, except the one she invented. She recognized what had happened immediately. This was her chance to start over, to ensure that this timeline, her new timeline, wouldn't make the same mistakes. So she aged herself to adulthood using magic, took the name Hecate, and ingratiated herself into the House of Hades. She became friends with Persephone and Hades, waiting patiently through the ages for the moment she knew would come, when Chronos would escape, and when Hades would have a second child. She was there when Melinoë was born. This new Melinoë, a version of herself from a different timeline, a chance to raise herself the way she wished she'd been raised. When Chronos attacked, Hades trusted Hecate completely, giving her his infant daughter because he believed she was loyal. He didn't know she was his daughter, just from a different when. Everything Hecate has done, every training session, every lesson, every harsh word and gentle encouragement has been about ensuring this Melinoë doesn't become what she became. This Melinoë needed to be strong enough to defeat Chronos, yes, but more importantly, she needed to remain capable of mercy, of compassion, of seeing enemies as beings with their own pain and complexity. That's why, despite Hecate's stern exterior, she's always pushed Melinoë to question, to think, to develop her own moral compass. That's why she insisted on training Zagreus through the dream communication, ensuring Melinoë would have an ally who understood the value of mercy. That's why every harsh lesson was paired with genuine care. She was raising herself the way she wished she'd been raised. And in doing so, she created a Melinoë who could succeed where she failed, not through superior combat ability, but through superior compassion. The revelation is simultaneously beautiful and tragic. Hecate has lived for eons, trapped in a timeline that isn't truly hers, watching history unfold with the terrible knowledge of what's to come. She's been alone with her mission, unable to tell anyone the truth. She's seen Zagreus grow up, knowing he's her brother but unable to acknowledge it. She's watched Hades and Persephone live their lives, knowing they're her parents but unable to claim that relationship. When Melinoë calls her mother, Hecate's response, "I am not," is technically accurate but emotionally complex. She's not Melinoë's mother. She's Melinoë. But she's also been more of a mother to this Melinoë than Persephone had the chance to be. The hot springs revelation scene being optional and missable has been criticized by some players. Such crucial information shouldn't be hidden behind relationship requirements, they argue. But there's a thematic reason for its placement. Not everyone needs to know the full truth. For the story to work, for Melinoë's mission to succeed, Hecate's secret had to remain secret. The reveal is for the player and for Melinoë herself, not for the other characters. After the revelation, Melinoë suggests they should pretend none of this happened, go back to how things were. Hecate agrees. Nothing really changes in their relationship. Hecate continues to be Hecate. Melinoë continues to be Melinoë. The knowledge exists between them, but it doesn't define them. This is perhaps the most profound aspect of the revelation. Identity isn't simple. Hecate is both herself and Melinoë. She's both the mentor and the student, the teacher and the lesson, the past and the future. She's proof that you can be multiple things simultaneously, that growth and change don't erase who you were, they add to it. The Fates, when they finally meet Melinoë, acknowledge what Hecate accomplished with a mixture of awe and approval. She manipulated destiny itself, not through weaving threads like they do, but through direct intervention across time. She made herself the most important factor in her own fate, and in the end, she succeeded. Melinoë didn't become consumed by vengeance. She learned to balance strength with compassion, purpose with flexibility. She succeeded not through being a better weapon, but through being a more complete person. Hecate, standing beside her in the hot springs, can finally see the result of her eons-long labor. This Melinoë, her Melinoë, saved their family without losing herself in the process. The cycle was broken. The pattern was changed. And for the first time since she was flung backward through time, Hecate can rest, knowing her sacrifice wasn't in vain. She's still herself, still Hecate, the witch of the crossroads, mentor to heroes and keeper of boundaries. But she's also proof that who you are can transcend even time itself, that identity is both fixed and fluid, that you can be your own answer to your own question. And sometimes the person you need to save most is yourself. Part 13. The End of Time. The epilogue of Hades 2 doesn't offer a simple happily ever after. The cosmos doesn't snap back to how it was before Chronos' return. The damage has been done, the timelines have been altered, and the fundamental nature of reality has been changed by everything that's occurred. But there's also peace, of a kind, a chance to rebuild, an opportunity for something genuinely new. The House of Hades is being restored slowly. True to his character, Hades is meticulous about the reconstruction, insisting that everything be rebuilt exactly as it was before. This means progress is slower than it needs to be, which frustrates some but comforts others. There's safety in familiar patterns, in knowing that despite everything, the underworld will be the underworld again. The gold remains. Chronos' temporal machinery, his clockwork modifications, his golden sands. They're all still there, integrated into Tartarus' structure now. Hades has decided not to remove them entirely, perhaps recognizing that they're part of the story now, part of what happened. You can't erase history. You can only build on top of it. Melinoë continues to descend into the underworld, but her purpose has changed. She's no longer hunting Chronos. Instead, according to the post-game content, she's hunting versions of Chronos from alternate timelines, fragments of his consciousness that split off when the timelines diverged. These alternate Chronoses still believe they're waging war, still think the family is their enemy, still pose a threat to reality. So Melinoë, with the reformed Chronos' help, tracks them down and eliminates them. It's strange, fighting alongside your former enemy against versions of himself that never experienced his redemption. Chronos seems almost sorrowful when facing these alternate selves, seeing clearly what he was, what he could have remained. Similarly, Typhon has alternate versions still threatening the surface. Melinoë travels between Underworld and Olympus, coordinating with the gods to eliminate these temporal echoes. The war isn't truly over. It's transitioned into something more like cleanup, removing the lingering traces of what could have been. And then, at a crucial moment, when enough of these alternate threats have been neutralized, when the timeline has stabilized sufficiently, Melinoë is summoned. The three fates finally make contact. They appear to her in a space between spaces, where their ancient power is palpable. Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, the spinner, the allotter, and the inevitable, stand before the young goddess who changed everything. First, they acknowledge what happened. They know they were banished by Chronos, removed from their positions as arbiters of destiny. But they also make a startling admission. They didn't entirely mind. The weight of determining every fate, of making countless arbitrary decisions that affected every life in existence, had become exhausting across the eons. The banishment, while meant as a punishment, gave them something they'd secretly craved: rest. Now, with Chronos reformed and the immediate crisis past, they've made a decision. They're not returning to their previous role. They're retiring. This is profound. The fates, those beings whose authority superseded even the gods, are choosing to step back. They're giving up their power over destiny deliberately, consciously, permanently. Their reasoning is simple but revolutionary. They believe mortals and gods alike will be better off determining their own fates. The old system, where everything was predetermined, where threads were woven by unseen hands and individual choice was an illusion, created a world of order, but also a world without genuine agency. The new era beginning now will be different. It will be messier, more uncertain, more prone to mistakes. But it will also be more genuine, more alive, more real. Because the futures that unfold will be the result of actual choices made by actual beings, not predetermined patterns laid out by cosmic weavers. The fates call this the new golden age, but it's nothing like Chronos' golden age. That was order imposed from above, predictability enforced by a tyrant who couldn't imagine any other way. This new age is golden because it's chosen. Because people will shape it themselves. Because tomorrow is genuinely unknown and therefore full of possibility. For Moros, the fate's emissary who delivered doomed prophecies to mortals, this retirement creates an existential crisis according to post-game dialogue. His entire purpose was to inform people of their destined deaths, to serve as the messenger of inevitable fate. With the fates retired, with destiny no longer predetermined, he's suddenly unemployed in the most cosmic sense possible. But perhaps that's also liberation. Moros can choose his own path now, free from the duty of delivering bad news, free to discover who he is beyond his role as fate's messenger. Melinoë returns to the crossroads after meeting the fates. The world continues. The gods continue their work. Mortals live their lives, now truly free to shape their own destinies without invisible threads guiding every choice. With all truths revealed, with the family restored, with Chronos reformed and the fates retired, what's left? Life. Simple, complicated, messy, beautiful life. The House of Hades slowly returns to normal. Zagreus can finally be reunited with his family in person. Persephone and Hades work on rebuilding together. Cerberus, That faithful three-headed guardian allows Melinoë to pet him for the first time after the true ending, a small but significant gesture showing that trust can be rebuilt. The painting that Melinoë has stared at her entire life, the unfinished family portrait, now has meaning. She knows those people. She's saved them. And while the painting was never completed, the family it depicts is more complete now than it ever was before Chronos' attack. Because they've been through fire together. They've faced the worst and survived. They've learned that even when time itself turns against you, even when the most inevitable force in existence seeks your destruction, there's always hope. There's always a choice. And sometimes, that choice is mercy. The master plan of Chronos, that intricate, brilliant, seemingly unstoppable design, failed not because it was flawed, but because it was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Chronos believed that time was unchangeable, that the past defined the future, that patterns, once established, would repeat forever. But Zagreus proved him wrong. By choosing mercy when everything said choose violence, by offering redemption when revenge seemed more satisfying, by believing that even time itself could change, Zagreus did what no weapon could do. He gave Chronos a reason to want to change, and that made all the difference. The story of Chronos, the Titan of time, ends not with his destruction, but with his transformation. Not with his defeat, but with his redemption. Not with the cycle continuing, but with the cycle breaking. Because in the end, time learned what Hecate already knew, what Melinoë discovered, what Zagreus understood instinctively. You are not defined by your past. You are defined by your choices in the present. And the future is always, always open to change, even for time itself. Closing. Like, subscribe, call to action. And there you have it, sleepers. The complete story of Chronos, the Titan who weaponized eternity, the master manipulator who deceived even chaos itself, and the grandfather who learned that some cycles are meant to be broken. His master plan was perfect in every detail except one. He never accounted for mercy. He never imagined that his grandson Zagreus, standing over his vulnerable reforming body with weapon in hand, would choose conversation over execution, would offer redemption over revenge. And that single act of unexpected compassion did what no weapon could. It gave Chronos a reason to change. Not through defeat, but through showing him an alternative he didn't know existed. Time, it turns out, can be changed. Even the most inevitable force in existence can choose a different path if someone is willing to take the risk of showing mercy. If you've enjoyed this journey through time itself, through Chronos' intricate plans and the unexpected twist that brought them crashing down, please consider subscribing to Sleepable Gaming Lore. Hit that like button to help others find these deep dives into gaming's richest stories. Share this with fellow lore enthusiasts who appreciate when games give us narratives worth dissecting. And rest easy tonight, knowing that even in the darkest stories, even when facing the embodiment of inevitability itself, there's always room for hope, for change, for choosing compassion over cruelty. Sleep well, friends, and remember, time may be patient, but kindness is timeless. Good night.